So with us today, we have Amanda Rizo, who's been on the podcast before. And now she's going to be joining us again for this little webinar section. And then we also have on for the first time, Crystal Miranda, who on IG is the Healthy Mind Movement, along with her own personal one. And then we have Paul, as usual. So thank you guys for coming on and doing this with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
Yeah, you guys will definitely be leading the way, because if I keep speaking, I'll definitely be speaking out my butt a lot. So I'll let Paul kind of guide the beginning of the conversation, and then we can just kind of go from there with some of the topics we're going to cover. But the basis is going to be mostly built on mental health and some of the thought processes and ideas around that contributing to sports performance, and also the negative ramifications of that as well. So go ahead, Paul, and lead us off with some of the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it goes without saying that mental health and physical activity, they're inextricably connected, right? We know that the more physically active we are, we tend to be happier, have better sense of well-being, especially if that involves being outside. But when we get into the idea of strength sports, physique sports, there's a very fine line between doing what is required to achieve the goal and doing, taking that a little bit too far into that disordered mindset. So one of the things that I think we could start on is, at what point if we could assign a definition or a working definition of the point at which a behavior that is required to achieve a goal becomes a disordered behavior, where it crosses that line between necessity and compulsion, for example.
Good question.
Yeah.
Really good
Crystal, do you want to kind of give a shot, start out, and then Amanda can chime in?
Sure. Yeah, that's a really good question. Mental health has become a huge buzzword, and it's great that really people are talking about it, because it really is important. But, I think a lot of people really confuse mental health and mental illness as being one thing, and they're not. So it's really important to differentiate the two. Mental health is something that we all have. We all have it. It's how we just see the world, how we function, how our relationships, how, our social interactions are, how our emotional awareness is, our, everything. And mental illness really crosses that line where it becomes a point where we can't really function. We're having a lot of trouble handling life, and we have a lot of trouble, maintaining our day to day, and having troubles with our relationships and all that stuff. And really, I guess the point would be where mental health crosses that line where it's really hard for you to function in a healthy manner that you can control.
Okay. So, I mean, within the context of what we're going to talk about here, so it would be at the point in which your physical pursuits impact your ability to have a quality of life outside of that.
Absolutely, yeah. When things just become, they're prolonged and they keep being unattended to, that it really does hinder a lot of things in our lives, and it starts taking a toll at us physically, emotionally, mentally. And obviously, as an athlete and as a coach, and in this realm, it's their ability to perform and their ability to carry on their duties as an athlete or see any long-term progress.
Amanda?
Yeah, Crystal hit it right on the head, where it's mental illness manifests in the way that it doesn't allow us to properly function in either one area or many areas in our lives. And I think what we see a lot in the fitness arena is denial about it. And a lot of people saying like, no, I got this. Like, I can still go out with my friends and I'll just take like my meal with me, or I can just order like plain chicken and just salad on the side. So we want to pay attention to what our mentality actually is. Like, how are you feeling when you're interacting in all of these different areas inside of the gym and outside of the gym? Is there a lot of negativity? Is there a lot of rigidity? Like things needing to be a certain way? Otherwise, if something falls out of that schedule or plan, does everything implode? Are you becoming extremely stressed about that? And that's when we start to see like hints of mental quote unquote illness.
I feel as though almost those behaviors that you mentioned, the you know, like strict rigidity. It's almost glorified amongst a large amount of the population, right? It's like, you know, I do what it takes all the time, no days off. And, you know, it's really tough to block out whether it's a disordered behavior or whether they truly believe that that is what's required to achieve the goal. You mentioned denial. What if it's almost like a lack of perception, like a lack of understanding? They don't see it as disordered because to them it's what's required. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. And so in that case, we want to start identifying, okay, if it needs to be a certain way, how is this impacting your social life?
Okay.
How is this impacting your self-perception? And what happens, again, like I said before, if things don't fall according to plan, what are you doing? Like, what's your reaction with that?
So to piggyback off what you said really quick, Amanda, this is actually a really interesting topic that you bring up, because you're right, it's balance. And I was actually having a very similar conversation with my PhD dissertation topic is it's the emotional connection or relationship between performance and strength athletes. And one of the things that we were talking about with my advisor was, you know, the aggression that goes into a lot of like strength sports, right? It's just head on, because it's, you know, to a certain extent, you know, you need some of that, right, to pull the amount of weight that you're pulling and to perform to your best of your abilities. So a lot of people take that, and we've noticed that a lot of people do not know how to just leave that reaction of aggression and that power just only at the gym, and they use that same mentality for different parts of their life, in relationships, how they tackle problems, how they tackle conversations and communications with other people. And it's really important to know the difference and when it's appropriate to use it and when it's not.
Interesting. Yeah, I definitely I see that a lot. I can speak for myself. I mean, when it comes to my training, very, very analytical, very, you know, I would say driven and rigid. Like if it's something's written on the paper, I'm going to do it regardless of, you know, other factors. But it took me a really long time to realize that that doesn't fly outside the gym. Right.
Yeah.
Now shifting gears a little bit towards nutrition. This is probably where we see the most towing of the line between disordered behaviors and, you know, the necessities. Could you guys share your, again, a working definition of what you would say, you know, a healthy relationship with food would be?
Yeah. I think particularly with someone who is competitive, I think there are special cases when it comes to that, because obviously when you're in competition, you have to stick to a certain regimen in order to achieve goals and in order to like possibly win a competition. So going with your question, what's a more balanced way of approaching nutrition is having flexibility. If you're able to have flexibility and also perceive like what your body is telling you, that's when we can say, okay, things are healthy. Like, for example, if you are in an overreaching phase in training, you're starting to notice, oh my gosh, like I'm very hungry, I'm very fatigued, my sleep isn't that well. Okay, so let's look at what's going on nutritionally. Are you feeding yourself enough? And then if you're able to use that insight to make some adjustments, and that's not to say like, okay, let's go raid the cabinet. It's just being able to use your perception and judgment and intuition flexibly, excuse me.
Yeah. Cool. Crystal?
Yeah, I definitely agree. And it's really about balance. And that's something that I like to really teach a lot of my clients. And, you know, and I think that they do is life really is balanced. And, you know, as an athlete, it's really, you know, it's part of of what the routine of what they have to do. But there's nothing wrong with counting calories. Absolutely not. But if it becomes an obsession, it becomes something that you can't step away from, even when you're outside of the gym or when you're not getting ready for a competition, or you're, you know, it's like Amanda said, it's being flexible and having that awareness to understand when it's like, you know, really impairing your life in more ways than one.
Yeah. Yeah. I have clients that come to me that have no interest in actually competing, and they're very, very rigid with their diet, like tracking every day, and also finding themselves binging because they're restricting and they feel that they have to like follow this sort of plan. Yeah.
So my question would be then, how do you get someone to that, right? Like you get someone who has a lot of flexibility and freedom within their diet and they're overweight and they want to lose weight. So then you teach them the process of macronutrients and what they are and what they do for your body and how to count calories and how to track that. So you have to bring them into some type of routine or rigidity for them to lose the freedom that they had of maybe negative perceptions of what food is, bring them to that. And then how do you get them out of that phase into like this flexibility phase to where it's not overly consuming to them? Because you have some people who will be, I'll count macros and calories for the rest of my life because that makes me feel at ease. And if that's the case, is that truly a bad thing, right? If they're at ease and they still have a quality of life that they're happy with, is that a bad thing?
Not necessarily. I mean, it's like I said, it's about balance and it's about how you function. And, for some people, counting calories, for example, it's some sort of sense of control, and for whatever personal reason that might be. But if it's not impairing their life in any way, if they're healthy and if they're able to manage and balance everything else out, then it might not necessarily be something that needs to be addressed. Right. And I think that's the balance. The balance is is it really hindering my life in other aspects, or am I okay? Because some people are like, oh, I don't, I feel like this is wrong. Well, does it bother you? Does it hurt you in any way? Does it hurt other people around you? No. Okay, then if it's healthy and if you're okay with it, then I guess that would be the balance.
It almost seems like there's this gray area where it's like, okay, like let's take a circumstance that we've all seen with clients, right? The client who is so driven and motivated that they're going to bring a Tupperware food to a family dinner. Okay. Happens all the time. If that person doesn't care and is totally fine, they bring their Tupperware, they enjoy the social outing, they have no negative feelings about the encounter, they leave with their cup full, having met with their family and everything like that, and they just happen to eat out of a Tupperware, versus the person who does the exact same thing but feels miserable about it the whole time. Right. That would be kind of the differentiating factor, right? It's the underlying feelings behind the event.
Yes. What is the perception of your experience?
Absolutely. And missing out on family gatherings and going out with friends because you can't eat, that's impairing in more ways than one. So
of course.
And it's when it comes to mental health, and I think psychology in general, it's very subjective in the sense that it really is case by case. I know it sounds, but it is what it is. And it's case by case basis. What works for me might not work for you and vice versa. And that's okay.
Exactly.
So in Paul's scenario there, one of the things you get a lot is the feedback that your family and friends give you. And a lot of times it's very guilt driven and negative feedback of why you're doing this to yourself. So as someone who's dedicated and thinks that like, this is the way I want to go and it doesn't really bother me, but it bothers the people around me and therefore I get bothered by it. How have you guys talked to your clients about like going about that approach to letting your family and friends understand what you're doing so that they get behind you instead of trying to deter you from it?
Yeah. I usually like to encourage my clients to open the door of communication with your family and let them really know and understand where you're coming from and what your intentions are with eating out of a Tupperware, your goals. Because a lot of times it's just the unknown and people like project their own perceptions or beliefs onto it, and they think that you're miserable because you're eating out of a Tupperware or that you're going to the gym for 2-3 hours, when in actuality you're having a great time. So it's about communicating that to other people has been really helpful for my clients. And then with their own internal process is not taking that on, not taking other people's projections and then putting them onto themselves, because we really want to foster that independence, that just freeness of exploring something that they really enjoy and want to pursue.
Absolutely. Not everyone's going to understand or agree with things that we choose to do with our lives, and that's okay. But it's really important for you to have that open communication, because a lot of people judge or or, guilt trip you, especially family and friends, it's because A, that, they're messing with you, A, but B, it's because, they don't understand. And that's that unknown. And by raising that awareness and helping them understand that, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is why I'm doing it. It makes me happy. It brings me purpose and fulfillment. And I truly enjoy it. It's a lot easier for people to be like, okay, I get it.
Now, what about the opposite end of that spectrum, right? Like, say you're a family member and you see someone who has disordered eating, like it's clear as day, but they don't see it. They don't see the destruction that they're causing to themselves, whether it be anorexia, bulimia, binge eating, right? Those things. How do you, as a family member, as a friend, go about bringing that up in a healthy way? What have you guys found to be something that could be a way to go about it that's productive, as opposed to judgmental or guilt tripping?
Reaching out, asking the other person, how can I support you, instead of like imposing your own opinion about what is right for them. Asking them, okay, how can I show up for you? What do you need at this time? And sometimes that's outside of the situation of eating or their compulsion, if you will. Asking them, okay, like, I see that you're struggling here, or I've been noticing changes. Bringing that up to the person. And if you start feeling like resistance, okay, back away.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Language really, 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 really matters. And how we approach a situation really, really matters. And, step away from using words, like judgmental words, like, oh my God, you look so skinny, or oh my God, you look too fat, or you look this, or, what is your problem? I don't understand what you're doing. It's really important how we approach these scenarios, because a lot of them are really sensitive, especially when it comes to disordered eating patterns. That's nothing to play around with, and especially when it becomes a little too out of hand, and it could really, really, it's dangerous for the person experiencing that. So approaching the situation in a non-judgmental manner. And like Amanda said, how can I help you? Is there anything that I can do to help you to understand this better? Has anything helped you in the past? Can I do anything? And when the person, because a lot of times they will resist, just like in any other problem, know that you could only do so much, because at the end of the day, you can only help people that, really want the help, because you can only do so much.
Right. And also educating yourself about the subject or whatever the person's experiencing. Knowing more about it, knowing more resources, and maybe even offering that to them could be helpful.
Is it almost like an inoculation thing, where you don't go in trying to like do it all in one time, but you bring it up, maybe touch on it, and then see what pushback you get. If you get pushback, step away. A couple weeks later, maybe bring it up in a different scenario. Is it something along those lines that's going to be more effective?
Yeah, I think that's a more gentle approach versus like a full-on sit-down interrogation.
Intervention, yeah.
Yeah, intervention. Because most likely these behaviors and these patterns have been going on for a long time. It's just somehow we're starting to see like an actual physical manifestation.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree. And you can't really bombard people with anything all at once, just like in anything else. So taking things one step at a time, educating yourself, presenting it in a good way, and in a way that's, like I said, not judgmental, but that's really important.
Yeah, Kelly made a really good point, like from her own experience. The phrasing and tone are very important in discussing anything with regards to health. And I found from my own experience as a coach, the statement that you mentioned, Crystal, is like, how can I help you in this instance, right? How can I be of service to you to deal with the barriers that you're encountering? And it's never a one-shot deal where they say, I need X, Y, and Z. Most of the time they don't know what they need.
Yeah.
And I find as well, I will periodically, kind of not test my clients, but use certain events as a teaching moment. So if I know it's their birthday, for example, hey, enjoy a meal on your birthday. And then once they've had that meal, whatever happens, whether they binged or whether they, had a treat and then went on with their life, whether there was, a balanced approach or an unbalanced approach, whether there was guilt or shame associated afterwards and some type of purging, whether exercise or physical, I use it as a teaching moment to say like, hey, what were you feeling in this moment? How can we work through this? What are you feeling and how can we build this in and say, next time you're faced with this same situation, here are some strategies that you can use.
Yeah.
Right? Like little teaching moments along the way, I find are very beneficial.
It's really effective. And, as coaches, you guys don't have not only a responsibility to your clients or to your athletes, but you also have a tremendous opportunity for a lot more. And, those teaching moments really are opportunities for you to, kind of dig deep, or even just be like, hey, or acknowledge any sort of problem. And it kind of builds that rapport where you're like, you know what, if I am going through something, I feel okay letting you know.
Yeah, for sure. That coach athlete relationship can be strengthened very much during times of struggle for the athlete, for sure.
Absolutely.
For sure. So this kind of feeds well into the second point. Like I kind of outlined 4 themes for today. The first being, training as a means to improve well-being. The next we kind of touched on, and I think we can build further, but like common cognitive distortions of the strength athlete or physique athlete, to that matter. What are some of the common cognitive distortions that you often see? And what could be some strategies as coaches we could use to shine a light on them and perhaps attempt to help our athletes work through them?
Well, for me, cognitive distortions, they come up so often because most people don't really understand them all in its entirety. They're so important. And the more people know about them, the more you're like, oh, okay, that makes a lot more sense than what I'm going through. And we all have them. They're automatic negative thoughts that they pop up and we really can't do anything about them. A lot of people say you can control your thoughts, but you really can't. You can control how you react to them. So it's really important to understand the difference because, you really can't control your thoughts. But so when these thoughts pop up into our mind, that's when we have the awareness and the education and the tools to kind of challenge them. That's when we are able to move forward. But 2 that I see often are the all or nothing thinking, the black and white. That really, it's not good.
Oh yeah.
0 to 100 mentality. It really, really hinders a lot of people. They use words like, oh, I'm never going to do this. I always do that. Those are bad words because they really keep people stuck. So try not to use those all or nothing or black and white terms. And another one that I see often are should statements. And should statements, oh my God, they're so damaging. Oh, I should have done that better. I should be able to hit this number. I shouldn't have done that. If we knew how to do that, and if we should have, should is stupid word because, if things were happening the way they should, a lot of us wouldn't be in trouble or problems or going through anything. So those are 2 big ones that I see often.
Yeah, I can only second that. Those are the big ones. Those are the big ones, just absolute thinking and just absolute black and white thinking, and then imposing like a necessity for yourself. Like it needs to be a certain way. Oh man, and that just boxes us in. These are all of the cognitive distortions that come in. Like if things have to be a certain way, then what happens when life throws you something else? And then what do? You're not really well equipped because you haven't allowed yourself to conceptualize something different. And so what I like to work with my clients doing is just expanding that perception and allowing yourself to have a different possibility.
Cool. I just want to make a point too for the people in attendance. If you do have questions, you can pop them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and can kind of answer them as we go. Yeah, the cognitive distortions, I definitely see them on, within the nutrition scope of like, I had this social gathering, I should have done this, but I did this instead, or, I didn't plan well, so I just ate whatever I wanted. It's very common, and again, teaching moments and using these moments to strengthen the coach athlete relationship, and never shame people for them. Shine a light and say, hey, like this is what's holding you back here. Had you enjoyed your treat and then gone on with life, you wouldn't have been so stressed about your meal. You wouldn't have lost sleep. You wouldn't have woken up and done fasted cardio to make up for your treat that you had. And so on and so forth. And the quality of life seems to continue. What would be, as a coach, some common signs that we would want to refer out, right? Because we do have a scope that is, I feel some people expand it much beyond what their capabilities are and do a lot of harmful damage to people. But what are some signs as coaches that we can look for that, hey, maybe this is something that I can't help with?
I first would say that you would probably see a lot of negative self-talk, a lot of self-deprecating language,
Okay.
a lot of repetitive, concerning behaviors like continued binging, even though we structure a fairly flexible plan or we allow for free meals and it's still just like happening. In parents in other areas of life, like we mentioned earlier in the beginning, like the person's not allowing themselves to reconnect with family or connect with friends. They have a very small sort of life, if you will, like it's just work, gym, meal prepping, and sleep. Those are some.
Sounds like most bodybuilders, I know.
Most bodybuilders. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with that stuff. It's and also kind of, we know our people, even if we don't have, we know of a, we don't want to see them every day. We know our people. We know how their patterns, their personalities, and any changes in behavior is really important to note. And something that I see often, oh, I haven't seen you, posted anything in your social media for a long time. And they used to post things all the time. Everything's okay? Oh, oh no, actually I've been really stressed out, or I'm taking a break. That's usually what I hear. I just take a break. I needed, I needed to focus on myself, or I was really overwhelmed. Things to note. Change the behavior. And this also in performance, they're sending you, I know as coaches, you ask for usually videos and of their workouts and their lifts. And are you noticing anything that's different, or any progression, any changes in that? Those are really important to note because those are signs that there's something else going on. And as coaches, you guys, like I said, you have the opportunity to do, more than what you get paid to do, right? Which is get athletes strong or make them better, or whatever the case may be. But, it's okay to say, hey, I have no idea how to help you. Let me see if I can find someone who can, instead of just being like, oh, just kind of pushing it under the rug.
Yeah.
Yeah. Building out a toolbox. Like one thing that I try to do is like build out a toolbox of professionals that, I can rely on, or I can ask questions to, or even refer out to, if Crystal, I've sent you clients and I've sent, local psychologists here, clients as well, whenever I, run into problems like that. But Crystal, you mentioned something when you were talking about, I needed to take a break. And the reality of the situation is when we're training and when we're trying to pursue things, the longer we can do what we're doing without taking breaks, the more progress we're going to make. Mm-hmm. Right? So the more sustainable the approach that we choose, the more long-term progression we can see. I feel like people, how do we do the best job to get people to see that big picture versus, the 6 inches that's in front of their face, or the next 6 weeks, or the next 6 days, right? What are some strategies we can use to extrapolate out and give people that long-term view to say, hey, instead of, stomping on the gas till you burn out your engine in 6 weeks, why don't you just go in third gear and just drive?
Right. And it's really important. And that's another thing that I see. And for one of the reasons that I'm doing my dissertation with the topic that I chose was because I have this fascination with, I find it so interesting, that correlation between strength sports and like emotional states. And I think for a lot of people, like you mentioned, physical well-being, like exercise and mental health really go hand in hand. And for a lot of people, exercise is the only way that they know how to cope. And the only way that they feel okay, they feel sane, they feel like they can release their stress and whatever aggression or negative feelings that they have. But, as you can't just work out every single day to that magnitude, because you will burn yourself out very, very quickly. So what happens when you can't train? You don't know what to do. So like quarantine, for a lot of people, it was very, 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 very difficult when they closed down the gyms. Because the gym is not only a place to go get fit and look good, it's a place it's your therapy for a lot of people. It's very therapeutic. That's how they stay afloat. So I guess, like you mentioned, telling them, hey, it's okay to take things as they come, because working out and training is only one part of life. The rest of your life is there waiting for you. It doesn't stop for anybody. It just keeps piling on. And the way I also, tell my clients is for motivation. Motivation, They're like, oh, well, I don't feel good. I don't have the motivation right now. Well, it's like, okay, well, motivation is just, it's really a feeling, and feelings come and go, as we all know. So
Mhm.
instead of focusing on the word motivation, focus on the word purpose. And that seems a lot more concrete than just motivation. So what's your purpose?
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, and that reminded me of, you know, Paul, what you were saying, like, okay, with the 6 inches in front of me versus like 20, 30 years out. We want to assess the client's goals. Like, is this really a goal of yours, or you just want the outcome? Like, what's going to happen all in between there? How are you going to be invested throughout
Love
all of that?
Yeah.
Because it's really is about the journey of however cliche we want to call it, but we learn throughout that process. If we just like got the medal right now, it wouldn't mean much to us. It's about the journey. It's about like, I'm getting this, like I'm working towards it, and I overcame all of these obstacles. So if we can have the client just focus on the now, focus on how do you feel right now? How can we continue to move towards this goal that you want, and make sure that it's sustainable?
Yeah, that brings into really good, I forget where I heard it, but it was something along the lines of, it's important to set goals, but if your values don't align with your goals, it's really meaningless. So if I set a goal of, I'm going to lose X amount of weight in 12 weeks, and they say that's some ridiculous 30 pounds in 12 weeks. Okay, like that's physically possible, but are you able to engage in the behaviors required for the next 12 weeks to achieve that goal? And most people aren't, right? They say they want that goal, but when you say, okay, you're going to have to drink X amount of water a day, you're going to have to eat these calories, you're going to have to restrict yourself in this manner, you're going to have to do this physical activity, and you work out the math and say, hey, this is a huge caloric deficit that you're going to be in for the next 12 weeks. Do your values align with that? Like, are you going to be able to restrict? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, yeah, for sure. And then the opposite happens of what you just said, where, during the process, they stack wins and build confidence, and their self-efficacy comes up, and so on and so forth. They end up, beating themselves into a hole, feeling like garbage about both their ability to achieve the goal and themselves.
Yeah, that goes hand in hand with what Crystal said, like motivation and the fluctuation of it. It's a state. It comes and goes. And so we want to find purpose in order to maintain that.
Love that. Yeah.
So just to go into that a little bit more, right? Like the idea that you have, Amanda, of like being in the present, being in the now, and not necessarily looking too far into the future, because that can be very overwhelming as well, right? Like when I was in the military going through training and stuff, and then being partnered up with special forces and getting to talk to those guys, right? It's like you focus on the next meal. You focus on getting to the next meal, right? Like if I can survive this training and get to that next meal, then I'm good, rather than if I can survive this 2-week phase, right? Because that's way more overwhelming while you're, getting killed on the beach or doing what you're doing, right? So how is that myopic viewpoint of like the next meal being the thing that drives me to keep going, as opposed to thinking about it in terms of I have 8 weeks, that's the bigger picture, but that can be overwhelming, but this next meal is not as overwhelming to get to? Like, how do you discern that between the people who are very fixated on the next thing and probably overly fixated to get through the hardships and the mental challenges of what they're trying to go through, rather than just being like, no, don't, we have 12 weeks, right? This is a 16-week goal. Let's focus on the bigger picture. Don't be so caught up in one meal, because it's the opposite, right? Like you get caught up in one meal because you overeat, but then you can get caught up in one meal to get back on track. So how do you discern what's right and wrong? Because if I would have thought of the things that I had to go through in the military, it's like I have 7 months in Iraq, 8 months in Iraq. If I would have just thought of that on day one, I would have been miserable the entire time. But if I can just be like, I can get through this mission, I can get through this day, I'm going to be so much better.
So the way I see it, and the way so my suggestion always, whether it's with clients, to people, myself, it's, like you mentioned, those 12 weeks, that's a lot, and a lot can happen in that time. So how do you, if you're quote unquote next meal. I always say it's really important to sometimes break up the goal into little goals. And by doing that, not only is it a lot more attainable and manageable, but also it kind of lets our brains know, it gives us a little dopamine rush, because dopamine is, our reward, right? We get that pleasure of, when we do something fast and easy, we feel good about it. And keeping those little goals and checking those off as we go will keep us on that dopamine high, where we're like, okay, all right, I got this. I did that. Now I can do something else. And then you build the confidence, you build the motivation, or you build the, the drive to keep on going to the next one, because it all leads to, again, that purpose where it's the end goal, but you're getting there in spurts instead of just one straight line.
Yeah, I think it's important to assess whether it's you yourself or for the other person, what's your focus? Because Tony, you were kind of like pointing towards different sides of the same coin, where someone can either be like ruminating about one meal, like obsessing about a set that they didn't perform as expected, or someone could be focused on something like a lot bigger, like, oh my God, this huge prep that I have for 5 months. Like that's very overwhelming. So we want to be able to tell, like, okay, where is this person's focus on? And so if it's causing a lot of distress, then we need to like either flip to a more general and broad perspective, or if the person is overwhelmed by that general and broad perspective, then we want to hyper focus and like, okay, we just need to get through this meeting at work, or we just need to eat this next meal. Yeah. And that way the person can have a lot more self-confidence.
And I also think language in this case also applies, because if we tell ourselves, I'm going to work out every single day this month, just an example, or I'm not going to cheat on my diet this month, because or whatever the case may be, that's a long time. A month is a very long time. A lot of things can happen. So what happens is, a few days in, we do what we said we were not going to do. Then we feel like total crap about ourselves. And then we're like, you know what, whatever. And then it's just like a whole cycle. So, language, I'm going to get through, like she said, like, I'm going to get through this meeting. I'm going to get through today. I'm going to work out today and tomorrow, or just today. And then tomorrow you wake up and I'm going to work out today. And it's language, and it's, kind of making things a lot more manageable than telling someone, oh, for the next 12 weeks, I have to do this, because a lot can happen in an hour, let alone in 12 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if you're overly fixated, right, on this one thing to get you through a tough time, right, and that's just surviving, how do you differentiate between surviving through a meat prep versus like actually thriving through a meat prep, right? Like, how do you like when I'm going through hard times and I can just focus on, if I'm running, I've done 110-mile bike ride for an adventure race, right? And I'm on mile 1, and it's like, if I can just get to mile 2, I'm good, but I'm suffering the entire way through, right? But it's what I chose to put myself through, and that suffering is okay. But for people who have that mindset where they're suffering through prep, where they're suffering through every workout because they feel like that's the necessity, like, how do you get them out of that mindset, I guess, would be one thing to think about. But then also, isn't that mindset somewhat a necessity when you're going through hard times in life, when you're going through stressful situations? Like, I don't know if I could have gone through the things that I've gone through if I didn't have such a fixated way of just trying to survive. I was never thriving in boot camp. I was just trying to survive. I was never thriving in training. I was just trying to survive. Is that really like a bad thing, right? You learn so much about yourself through those mental hardships. But I guess if you live your entire life trying to survive, that's an issue. Like, so how do you dissociate between that? How do you distinguish between thriving and surviving through the hard times?
Well, I don't think anything necessarily is a bad thing.
Yeah.
It just depends on the situation, and it depends on the person. And, obviously going through boot camp is a significantly different experience than, me going to the gym and doing cardio, for example. It's a different thing, and pain is something that, we all feel. It's just the suffering part is how it's how we can manage, right? We can't deal with the pain because we can't control that, but we can control how we suffer through it. So I guess in that case, you're right. And some of that suffering, that pain that keeps you going It's what keeps people going for a long time. And that's what builds resilience, because nobody ever becomes mentally strong by being good and having a, everything's fine. Everyone that's mentally strong and resilient and has grit is because they've gone through stuff in their life, and they've built up that tolerance where it's like, all right, I was able to get through this, so what else can I get through? But I guess it's just depending on the situation.
I feel like the differentiator is almost like the time constraint, right? Like, Tony, you knew that boot camp had an end date, and you didn't have to live in that state of suffering all the time. But would I be right in saying that it becomes a problem when you see everything as that?
Can I throw a curveball?
Yeah, 100%.
I see it as, okay, so pain it's involuntary. It happens. We all encounter like challenges and obstacles. However, suffering is a choice. We don't have to hold on to this belief that it is horrible and this is something that was like placed upon my life and I just have no choice and I'm just suffering through it. And I'm thinking like, oh, this is terrible. This is miserable. And you're perpetuating that idea. I think that's my intention with this, is like suffering is a choice. It doesn't have to be miserable. Just like contest prep does not have to be miserable. You can have fun with it, even though it's hard and challenging. And that's where the thriving comes in. Like, how are you using this as something productive for you? Like, you can overcome this pain, this difficulty without it being suffering and like heavy and weighing you down. It could be fun.
Absolutely. And fun is a really, exactly, that's how we thrive, not because we don't, it doesn't hurt us or we're not, going through the motions of it, but it's because at the end of the day, we find something enjoyable in it, some sort of purpose, some sort of drive to keep on going, because, going to the gym every single day and living, the regulars, counting your, macros or doing these and, lifting really heavy weight and keeping that discipline, that routine, that's no easy task. But if you do that every single day and you have that idea where like, this is absolutely horrible, it's that mentality. It goes down to how you see it. So if you make it fun, you make it something that you enjoy doing, enjoyable, despite the pain that you'll feel at times and despite the struggles that you'll feel, that's how you thrive in whatever it is that you want to do.
Kelly, did you still have a question?
I was just like going to reiterate what she just said.
Okay, cool.
Because it's total mindset, right? It really, really is. Like, oh, God, I always think back to 5 years ago when I was struggling and I had like wicked plantar fasciitis to the point that even a 20-minute walk was excruciating, but I ignored it. I ultimately ignored it. And that was my mindset, was it's temporary. As soon as you sit your butt down and elevate and do whatever you need to do for an hour, it's gone. And everything just kind of fell in place for me. But yeah, it's, to me, pain is mindset. It's relative. It's what you want to do with it and what it means to you. For like, I'm not kidding when I say my feet were throbbing. And after I got, I think it was 80 pounds off my frame, it didn't bother me anymore. So it's just, it truly is a lot of mindset, and it's regardless of your goals, I think. It's recognizing when it's like pain, discomfort versus injury, and you need to pause and hit the brakes.
Yeah, that's an interesting conversation. Hurt versus harm, right?
Yeah.
Right. Am I just, is something sore, or am I risking injury through pushing through it? And that could be a great way to pivot the conversation, right? When dealing, especially with, in physique sports, taking like heavy sets to failure, or with strength sports, pulling max effort singles is not fun. It doesn't feel good. So the differentiator between, is this discomfort that I'm supposed to be feeling and is beneficial for me to create an adaptation, or is this pain that is my body saying, hey, stop, you're going to hurt yourself? I feel like in strength sports, we run into the people who have no off switch a lot, who have like literally zero self-preservation mechanism. and it allows them to get to that point where they're very strong, but then shit just starts blowing off their bodies.
Yeah.
It's a tough balance to be struck. So how would a conversation like that go for you and a client, someone like that hurt versus harm discussion?
I mean, I really like that discomfort versus pain type of analogy, or that example, because discomfort is necessary. If we feel comfortable and fine all the time, we're not doing something, at least to the best of our abilities, because that's how we grow. That's how in all aspects of life. We need to have a little bit of discomfort, push ourselves, be uncomfortable, be awkward from time to time. But it's that pain.
Oh,
I might have lost her.
But definitely also mental and emotional.
We lost you for a little bit.
Can you say that again, Crystal? You broke up.
You guys have been going in and out too, so I'm trying to make pieces together. No, but I was saying that growth that's how you grow. It's through a little bit of discomfort, not necessarily pain all the time, but you need to be uncomfortable. And that pain and that discomfort, knowing the difference, not only applies to physical injuries, but also to psychological and emotional injuries as well. Yes. It's really important to know the difference. We're like, I feel really crappy today. I feel uncomfortable. I feel some sort of discomfort, where it's like, okay, I'm in constant emotional pain. I can't keep ignoring this. That's really important to understand.
Yeah, there's a big correlation between like our physicality and our mental health, especially if we start seeing a lot of ailments in our bodies. And any sort of pain, those are things to pay attention to, because it's our body's way of communicating to us, hey, something's not right. And it's oftentimes the way that we're processing our reality, our experience. So for example, Paul, you brought up someone that's just like, pushing pedal to the metal all the time, and like they're blowing things off their body, like torn bicep or something like that. You want to ask that client, or ask yourself, like, why do I feel this need to constantly push myself? Why is it never enough? When can I be satisfied? And what am I telling myself about myself?
Yeah. Right.
Well, it's like the same thing in pursuit of like life, right? You're always constantly trying to get more out of life. You're trying to do better. But when are you ever actually satisfied with where you are at in life? Like, how many days out of the week are you like, man, I'm really happy with where my life is, as opposed to I got to do more because I'm not happy with where my life is, right? Wow. And anyone that's a type A personality that wants to be successful in sports or be successful in business, it's hard for them to have that mindset of satisfaction, right? Because they correlate satisfaction with complacency. And we've been taught, as people that are trying to pursue great things, complacency is the enemy of success, right? So how do you get people to sit back and, pat themselves on the back and be present and be happy with where they are now, but also allow them to continue to push and be successful? Because it seems like it's almost, diopposite views, right? Like, they're two different things. How can you be happy and complacent, but then also keep pushing for higher achievements? So how do you distinguish that with people who are type A personalities that are trying to be the best?
Let me get a notepad, because I need to.
That's really important, because I see that a lot, where it's like, they have this mentality where, especially with like the personal development, like the self-development, like movement or age that we're in, self-help. And it's like, how can I get better? What can I do next? How can I improve? What other goals do I have? I need to keep crushing them. And there's nothing wrong with striving for better for yourself. Absolutely not. But it's really, really, really important, type A, type B, whatever type of personality, to tell yourself, hey, it's okay to, from time to time, to enjoy and embrace and just bask in and appreciate how far you've really come. Because if we look back at our life, you look back, I recently turned 30 this year, and I have so many things that I want to accomplish, and I tell myself, I should have done this, I should have done that. Those are my cognitive distortions come in. But it's like, it's okay to take a step back and be like, you know what? I am not where I want to be necessarily, but I am not where I used to be. And that is really, really important to kind of, convey to your clients and, yourself, where it's like, all right, it's nothing wrong with wanting more, but it's okay to sit back from time to time and be like, look, I can lift a lot more than I used to. My relationships are a lot better. I can communicate better. I ask for help now sometimes when I need it. Little things like that, and not disqualifying all the positives in your life is really important, because that's also a very big cognitive distortion that a lot of people go through.
Yeah. Focusing on the positive, focusing on that growth is so important. And we teach that to parents too when they're parenting children. Let's focus on the positive, rather than like, okay, what still needs improvement? What behaviors aren't really working? It's important to take a look at that as well, but we really want to emphasize, okay, the positivity, that growth. And I think it's also really important to distinguish, okay, when is it like just type A personality versus like, okay, you're appreciating the moment and then still like also moving towards your goals. And I think that fine line is inspiration and spontaneity. When someone's like really present, they're able to be spontaneous and they have that inspiration. Okay, yeah, like I want to start this project, and then they start working on it. Versus like, okay, like I haven't done enough today. I checked all of my emails, but I still need to post on Instagram, and it's like, it's constant. It's a lot more mechanic versus just the spontaneous inspiration to work on something that you're really excited about.
I like that.
Yeah, I like the spontaneity. It reminds me a lot of the flexibility that you were talking about in the very beginning, right? Because that's something that I deal with a lot of lifters, is the ability to have spontaneity within their life, to fully enjoy their life outside of the gym. You know, you'll have people who are getting ready for meets, and like for me, when I lived in Oregon, I would be getting ready for meets, and I wanted to hit a big total, but I also like going hiking. But I know if I went hiking, my lifts for the next week may not be as good as they should have been, right? But I was able to accept that, like, that would be the case, right? Like there's give and takes to everything. If I'm going to go on a 15-mile hike, I know squats are probably not going to be that great this coming week, right? And I'm willing to accept that. But for people who aren't willing to accept that, for people who are trying to be, you know, the best in what they do, I think a big disconnect for a lot of people in terms of the spontaneity thing is understanding that they can still achieve the things that they want to achieve, but also live a life that allows them to have some spontaneity. Do you feel like that's a hard conversation to have with people who are trying to be the best in the world, is also to live a little, to be present in the moment, and to enjoy things when they're just so worried about the all-time world record and whatever that takes?
Yeah. Crystal, you want to start that off?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's also, it kind of goes back to, it's really important to see things on a case by case basis. But I also think that it's important to let people know that, you know, it's different, because, you know, when it comes to, like, when you mentioned someone's trying to get, you know, a world record, or try to be the best in their sport, or be the best in their field, and that's great, and it's going to take a lot of, you know, commitment and dedication, and just really going at it 100%. But at the end of the day, like, when you reach the top, right? Like there's a whole other life there still. So I think it's understanding that, like, yeah, you work toward your goals, but that drive and that, you know, wanting to be the best, and only looking at the best, you know, that's going to eventually fade, because time goes by, we grow older, things happen. And, you know, once you achieve that what's next? Okay, you now you're the best. So now what's the next step for you? If you're the best, what's the next step? And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think it's really important to, if you're constantly striving, okay, let's say you got your goal, right? You're the best at whatever it is. So now what's next? And if it's that constant need to just continue going at 100%, not stopping, without, you know, having balance or flexibility, or being spontaneous, or having fun, then it's kind of time to reevaluate the situation and be like, what's going on?
That's a great pivot into the last, like, I want to be mindful of time, right? Because we've only been an hour, but the last thing I wanted to discuss is identity. So a lot of people have their identities completely wrapped within training, diet, the way they look, the way they perform. You know, hi, my name's Paul. I'm a power lifter. Not, hi, my name's Paul, I have 2 dogs, whatever. It's, hi, my name's Paul, I'm a powerlifter. And, selfishly enough, this is something that I'm kind of dealing with a little bit myself, because I might be done competing very soon. And Tony's already retired officially, but I'm still battling with the fact that, like, I got into the sport to try and figure out how strong I could be. And I think I might have found it.
Right.
So it's like, and I have a lot of clients that, say they get an injury and they can't train for a certain amount of time, or they can't perform to the level that they want to perform at to fulfill this identity that they have. How does that conversation go of, how do we reframe who you actually think you are?
Yeah, paying attention to the labels that we put on ourselves. Because
Yeah.
even the label powerlifter, or even Paul, Amanda, it's a name tag. It's not really essentially who you are. And so we want to look at, okay, let's peel back all of these layers and find out, what are the qualities? What do you bring into a relationship? What sort of connections do you make? How great do you feel when you're fully aligned as who you are? And what does that look like? What do you do? It's not so much that you're lifting weights. Okay, it's something that you like to do for fun, but that's not who you are. So we want to start discovering things outside of that label.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really important. And I like going back to the whole quarantine thing, I think it was really hard for a lot of people because there
Still is.
Yeah.
We're still closed up here, man.
Oh, really? In Canada?
Oh yeah. People are dealing with it a lot. It's crazy. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're fine. No, that's insane to even think about, because, for a lot of people, the closure for the gym, that was the big deal. Like, okay, if I'm not a powerlifter and if I'm not lifting my weights, what the hell am I doing? Who am I? And I remember I had and even then, like, or I got an injury, I can't do anything for this next 3 weeks. Then you're like, okay, what else can you do? You're like, I don't know. Maybe I can do just upper body because my leg's broken, or, it's like it's still just fixated on one thing. But like Amanda mentioned, we are so much more than what we do, and it has nothing to do with who we are. It's what we like, what do we bring to the table, what are our strengths, everything. We are so much more than just one thing, and it's really important for us to embrace and acknowledge that, because when that one thing is taken away from us, voluntarily or involuntarily, it's okay to dig into our toolbox of, all right, what else do I got?
Mm-hmm.
So what if it's beyond the social identity construct of the person, right? Like, I am a powerlifter, I am a Marine, but when I get done with the Marines, I'm no longer a Marine, but I still built myself into that community. That's the community that's relatable to me. That's the community I feel the most appeased with. That's the community I feel the most open with. Now I'm thrust into not being a part of that community anymore, and there's just a disconnect with everyone that's around me. Is that two different things, identity and community? And right, because a lot of lifters may be scared to quit lifting because they feel like they're going to be ostracized from that community, right? Like, when I got out of the military, I wasn't ostracized from that community, but if I'm not on base, I'm around a bunch of civilians, they don't really get to relate to me, right? I can't talk to them about Iraq and what I've done in Iraq. Powerlifters can't talk to, regular gym goers who wear neon outfits and gloves to lift weights, right? Like, you get out of that. Yeah, I'm talking to you up there, Canada.
Hey, listen,
you get
man,
out of that.
I don't wear gloves.
No shaming.
So how do you distinguish between those two things, and do they need to be distinguished, or can you attack them the same way, right? Because that's the hardest thing. When I got out of the military, there was such a disconnect between who I was for 4 years, the pride that I had in who I was for 4 years, and the people that I was willing to give my life for, to now I'm in a place where no one really cares, right? No one really cares about you as much as the people did. So how do you get over that sense of community versus identifying as a Marine, right? Because you're so proud of it. Like, why wouldn't you identify as a Marine? You're doing your due diligence, you're fighting, right? Or why wouldn't you identify as a powerlifter? Because it's, to a lot of people, that's given them sanctuary, that's given them self-confidence, right? And now you're telling them to strip that away, in a sense. So how do you deal with those type of things?
Well, Amanda, you can, if you want, you can take that, but really quickly, you know, you don't necessarily have to just strip yourself of that identity.
Yeah.
It's, I think, more importantly, maybe have more than one, because you're just so much more than one community. You can be part of multiple communities. You know, I'm a psychologist, a student, a sister, a friend. You know, it's more than one thing that we have to be. But if we, it goes back to that balance. And if we're throwing all our eggs in one basket in the sense of like, this is who I am, this is the only thing that I am. If you feel like you're being stripped of that, then you are going to feel absolutely lost. But, you know, power lifter, Marine, you know, neon wearing gym goer, whatever it is that you are, you know, you can be more than one thing, and you can also be part of more than one community.
Yeah, I think it's also important to reflect on the types of relationships you have with those people in your community, because if they're going to ostracize you just because you're not powerlifting anymore, then that's something to really look at. Like, how authentic are these connections? Like, is that the only way that I can connect with these people is like just telling them, okay, what were my lifts for the week? Or are they more well-rounded and balanced? And can they support me emotionally?
Yeah, I don't mean like they ostracize you, but the fact that like you're no longer training to be a power lifter anymore. You're not really going to the big meets you used to go to. You're going to a different gym because they have different equipment, because you're old and you can't do the things that you normally do because your knees are fucked up, your hips are fucked up, right? You kind of ostracize yourself a lot of times, but it feels like you're just not a part of that community. And, you know, because dealing with a lot of veterans, and I've ran charity stuff for veterans and dealing with them with PTSD, I found most of PTSD comes from their inability to disassociate with that community that they had, their inability to actually verbalize how they feel with people who can't necessarily know what they've gone through, right? That community is no longer there. And then therefore they get depressed, they feel isolated. And then we even have other things to showcase that you're a veteran and to continue to pursue isolation. So then you maybe you set yourself up for this idea of isolation. So I guess, how do you not create isolation within the person? Because it took me, I don't know, like 7 to 8 years to no longer feel like I was isolated. The last 7 to 8 years when I got out of the military, I spent trying to get back into the military because I felt so isolated from other people. So how do you help someone get over that?
I think that you mentioned something where you said, I no longer feel like this and that. And that's actually a really common cognitive distortion. It's emotional reasoning. Just because you feel a certain way doesn't mean it's necessarily the truth, right? I like to tell my clients all the time, like when they're like, oh, I feel this way because, I feel like this, I can't do this because of that. And it's like, all right, who's telling you this stuff? Is someone telling you you really can't be a part of it? Because that's a different story. But if you feel a certain way, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the actual truth. It's actually a pretty common negative thinking pattern, where it's just because you feel a certain way doesn't mean that. And then you can create your own identity after that. That's another thing where it's like, okay, well, you might feel it, or they've told you, or whatever happened, that you're no longer part of this particular community, but maybe you can start something else where you feel like you can connect with other people in similar situations.
Yeah, Tony, I think you brought up another good point where you said, like, I don't feel connected. Like, I'm out in the civilian world and I feel separate. And I think that's something that you're telling yourself, because you can connect with other people that might not necessarily have gone through your experience, but if they're willing to be present and they're listening and they're trying to make sure that they understand what's going on for you, then that's a route to connect with that person. Because I mean, you can connect with someone that's in line with you at the grocery store.
Right. I guess
it's not a matter of them having to have experienced what you have experienced.
It's a fear of judgment, I guess, then, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do you explain to someone what you did overseas? How do you not compartmentalize that when you talk to that person and they're like, oh, you did that? Like, oh, you're a bad person. It's like, no, that was just part of my job, right? So how do you overcome that fear of judgment then? How do you find the right people to talk to? Like, what are some of the things a person should look for? Like not to correlate powerlifting with the military, but a lot of people do characterize going to the gym as going to battle. They're battling the weights. They're putting themselves in stressful situations, right? And people can snicker about that, and that's perfectly fine. It's laughable from a military standpoint to think of that, but it is your desire to put yourself in stressful situations and your desire to overcome it, right? And not everyone, especially in America, is willing to put themselves in uncomfortable situations. So how do you talk to people about that without feeling like you're being judged?
Looking for signs about that person, about that connection. Like if you're able to witness maybe like in other areas or other times that you're sharing something, are they able to contain you? Are they able to provide supportive space? Like are they allowing you to fully express your emotion? And that's not to say like you're punching someone or something. That's not fully expressing your emotion.
Well, I do MMA and jiu-jitsu now, because you're allowed to punch people and get away with it.
But are they listening to you? Are they reflecting back to you? Okay, am I understanding this correctly? Okay, how can I support you in this time?
Yeah, and that's really important, man. I mean, not everyone's our people, and that's okay. Not everyone's meant to be our people or a tribe or a squad, whatever you want to call it, or a community, and that's totally fine. And you're right, finding people who may not necessarily relate to you 100%, but relating to you and kind of, understanding that you're a person, going through something or trying to express yourself is a completely different experience. But it all goes back to the mentality part of it. Unless, if we tell ourselves people are going to judge me because I said this, people are going to say this because I said that, or I did this, it all goes back to our own mentality and how we see ourselves. And we're feeling a certain way, but that might not necessarily be the truth.
Yeah. I mean, I get that, right? But I guess my biggest problem in talking to people about this type of stuff is, right, that rejection piece, right? You're extremely vulnerable that you're willing to open up and talk to someone, and then you talk to the wrong person, and then they reject what you're saying fundamentally by judging you. Then it's like, well, why am I going to do that again, right? Being vulnerable sucks. Being rejected sucks. Why would I continue to be vulnerable in those situations when the first 2 times I've done that, I've been rejected? How do you overcome that fear?
You could set yourself up perfectly for those scenarios. Like you can establish boundaries before you start the conversation. Like, hey, I'm going to share these things with you, and they're really heavy. They're really uncomfortable. I haven't shared them with so many people, and this is what I expect from the conversation. Like, I just want you to listen, or I just want you to validate me. Like, communicate your expectations from the situation instead of just like leaving it up for chance. And so the other person also understands, like, okay, this is what you need.
Right. And it's those boundaries, those communication boundaries, are also understanding that, who is it that we're talking to about our deepest, darkest pain or discomforts, because not everyone has the emotional tools to be able to reply to us in a way that's going to make us feel okay and not feel like absolute shit. Because we feel like, right, being vulnerable is really, really hard and it takes a lot of strength. So imagine us, hey, my next door neighbor, and I'm here telling him, whatever, something really, really painful and shameful that I feel about, or, or whatever the case may be. And he's not going to have the emotional tools necessarily to reply to me or be there for me in a way that I'm going to feel accepted. So it's also understanding who you're talking to, and right. And like Amanda said earlier, kind of looking for those little signs where it's like, have I said something to them before and they've reacted in a way that I feel okay to open up to them, or also, because that's really important.
Yeah, because that's one of the things that during this conversation I was thinking about, right? Like when you're dealing with high level lifters and you don't want to necessarily make it seem like during your communication that you're judging them, right? Like the idea of telling someone who wants an all-time world record is to be like, well, don't define yourself as a power lifter. To them, they may feel like, why are you telling me that? Like, I feel so betrayed. I told you everything that I wanted to do. Now you're telling me that I should do more than just be this, and this is all I've ever wanted to do. So how do you, like, that communication piece is so important, right? You don't want to dissuade people from their preconceived like current dreams and what they want out of life, but you also don't want them to go down such a deep rabbit hole that they're going to put themselves in a negative place. So how do you talk to your clients about situations like that without having that disconnect to where they no longer trust you. They'll just go to the next person that tells them exactly what they want to hear, right? Because one of the things you said, Amanda, that struck me as odd was like, you want somebody to validate you, right? But when you talk to certain people, do you always want to validate what they believe if it's a negative thing, right? How do you like balance that validation
Okay,
side,
so
right?
validation, to clarify, thank you, and I'm glad you brought it up, is validating their feelings, like validating their experience and saying like, okay, I see this is very challenging for you. I see that you're having a hard time with this. You're very frustrated. That's the validation that we want to give, not so much of like, yeah, you were right in this, like you should have done that.
Gotcha.
That's more towards like, okay, behavioral validation. And then we get into like the whole shoulds, which is not as productive.
Yeah, that's what I was going for. Yeah, just because you validate someone doesn't mean that you agree with them. On the contrary, it has nothing to do with that. It's opening that space where you're like, hey, I hear what you're saying. I don't understand it. I don't agree, but that goes down the line. But just validation has nothing to do with you agreeing with them.
So when talking to an athlete, it would be something along the lines of, hey, I understand you want to be the best in the world, and I can get behind that because I've been there. I want it to be the best in the world, but just know that this is going to be a short-lived thing. And to also think about expanding other things that you see yourself doing while you're doing this can be possible. So you're accepting what they're telling you, that they want to be the best, but then you're also kind of nudging them along the way to do other things, explore other things, and that won't create like that disassociated piece of this person's judging me. Is that a decent way to look at it?
I mean, yes, I that'll be a good way, right? Just validating, saying, hey, okay, but at least right now from the beginning to be like, hey, at the end of the day, as a coach, we all have our specialty, right? As a coach, they're going to come to you and pay you to make them stronger, make them the best in the world, make them the best that they can be. And that is going to be your job. Along those lines, that's where you have to have the awareness and kind of dissect where there's things going south, or there's things that need help or more attention, maybe even beyond your area of expertise or your area, your toolbox. So that's where you differentiate. But if an athlete's coming, the way I see it, at least personally, if an athlete's coming to you to make you the best in the world, then you're like, okay, well, let's see what we can do. And then from then on, you kind of be like, okay, this is what I'm seeing. This is, you get to know your athlete and the person, who they are, what their weaknesses are, the things that they're struggling with, and that may or may not impair them from being the best.
Yeah, because I always see after meets, people will get done with their meet and they'll write their meet write-up and they'll be like, I just want to apologize to everyone in my life for these last 12 weeks. And it's like, I don't necessarily know if that's the route you want to go, but also, yeah, like you said, just being open with that athlete in the very beginning, and then just looking for red flags after you establish like a solid rapport with that person, then just slowly bringing that up. But that solid rapport needs to be the first thing that is built, I would assume.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
All right. Anything else, Paul, you want to cover?
No, I think I covered all the points, and actually one extra one, so I'm good. Yeah.
Awesome. Anything you ladies want to end with that we may have glossed over or overlooked?
No, I think we covered a lot of really important points. I just want to thank you guys, because mental health is really, really important. I know I'm biased, but it's really, really, really important. Okay, and it really makes up so many different parts of our lives. And as athletes, when I work with athletes and I just see their interactions, whether it's in a personal level or in a different level, a lot of it's so they really address and focus on like physical injuries, and then I can't do this because I'm hurt in this way physically, but it's the emotional injuries and the mental injuries really impair the athlete along the way, very significantly so. And it really helps, it stops them from achieving to a certain state where they feel content or where they feel proud or where they feel good, because it really impairs a lot. So it's important to really address athlete mental health and have coaches. You don't have to be obviously mental health professionals, but because you have a different duty, but at least knowing the basics and knowing when to look for red flags and knowing how to refer out is very, very important.
Yeah, I just want to thank you all for giving us the opportunity to speak about this subject, because I feel that it's starting to come up in the arena, and it's very exciting. And it's something that it's much needed, for all of us, for those that provide services and the ones that receive it.
Yeah, definitely couldn't agree with you ladies more. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you all for sitting in on the podcast and tentatively maybe thinking about asking questions, but never doing it. This was a judgment-free zone, guys. You could ask as many questions as you want, but we appreciate you guys for sitting in and being a part of it. Thank you guys so much.